Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings NBA video for 9th. It's a small 6-game slate that we have going tonight, but it should be a pretty high-scoring evening. Every game on the slate has a total of at least 203 points. Excuse me. Although we do have a couple spreads that are getting a little bit up there. I think there's at least 2 of them that are at, like 12 or 13 right now. There's another one at 6, another one at 9. We have another spread at like 3 or 4, and another one that we're not really sure about with the news about LeBron James. So let's start with that. We'll start right there. LeBron James has been announced out already. They're going to sit him for this game tonight. So that Cleveland-Houston game is interesting. Cleveland obviously can use the wins to keep locked up their top seed. They don't really need it in order to get all the way to the finals, but it would be nice for them to keep. Houston, on the other hand, is the 8th seed, so they do need to win as many games as they can to make sure that they do get in the playoffs. So that made this game a whole lot more interesting. So let's call up the slideshow that we're going to be using tonight and why that information is important. So the 4 guys that we have on the list here are George Hill at 4,700, James Harden at 10,400, J.R. Smith at 4,400, and Kevin Love at 6,800. Now, George Hill is favored. His Indiana Pacers team is favored by 7 going up against the Chicago Bulls today in the game that has a 203 total. Now, Chicago has been horrible lately. Jeff Teague just lit them up for 50 fantasy points last night. And if you look back in the game logs, they've been getting lit up and giving up big upside games to basically every point guard who's been going up against them lately. George Hill himself had 41 fantasy points against them the last time these two teams met. So it is a matchup where we've been seeing a lot of guys get towards their season highs. Now, Butler will probably limit Monta Ellis a little bit. So that means that Indiana's going to need somebody else to step up and score and handle the ball and get to the basket a little more. With as good a matchup as George Hill has, I do expect him to have an upside game today. Really only needs to get us about 27 fantasy points to give us 6x value and be a really solid play. And I think he's going to get up into the low 30s tonight. Like I said, he had 41 the last time these two teams met, so it's not out of the question to him here. About is James Harden at 10,400. He's in a high total game against the Cleveland Cavaliers, and we just found out that LeBron James is not going to be playing. Now, as I said in the opener, Houston is clinging to the 8th spot in the playoffs in the West. So they need to continue to win games to make sure that they get in. And because of that, Harden has played 40 minutes in each of the last 4 games and has been averaging over 40 minutes in his last 8 games. He had 64 or more fantasy points in 3 of those last 4. And the thing about Harden is he's a very high fantasy point per minute producer. That's what FPPM stands for, fantasy points per minute. So with him being a high fantasy point per minute producer, the more minutes that he plays, the more points he's going to score. With him being up to like 40 minutes right now and his, fantasy production being somewhere around 1.5 points per minute lately, that means that he's a guy that's going to give you an average of about 60 fantasy points. So if you have Houston in a must-win game and Harden playing 40 minutes in that must-win game and kind of pushing the pace and, really trying to take it to a defense, I think this is a great game, a great spot to put him in. I think he can get you 60 to 70 fantasy points for 6 or 7x value and pay off the price to 10,400. Now, the next guy I want to talk at 4,400. He's in a high total game against Houston on the other side, so he's going to be the guy who draws James Harden defense. Now, LeBron is out of this game, and there's a good chance that Shumpert might not play either. He's listed as questionable. Now, without LeBron, the usage for everybody on this roster is going to go up. And Smith should be a guy who gets close to the 30 minutes in this game and the 25 fantasy points that he was doing when he was playing that many minutes this game, and maybe 35 or 40 minutes. I mean, we saw earlier in the year when they were banged up, 35 minutes a game, he was getting us 30 fantasy points. So at 4,400, if he gets his 30 fantasy points, that's going to be a 7x return on his value. And without LeBron in there, they're going to be needing guys to score. That's one thing that J.R. Smith can do, especially when he has a matchup this good in a high total game with a high pace. There's a lot going in his favor here today. So J.R. Smith at 4,400 seems like a really solid value that we want to be looking at. The last guy I'm going to talk about is Kevin Love. For instance, paced up game against Houston. Houston is one of the worst teams in the league at defending the power forward spot, so it's a great matchup for him. And again, LeBron is out, so Love is going to see a bump in his usage. He's going to see a bump in his field goal attempts. They're going to run a little more of the offense through him, and they're going to expect him to put up some points today. If you look at his recent game log, his price has come down because he had 2 games in a row where he played like 1 game and then only like 16 minutes the second game. And then he sat out the game after that because we know that he was banged up and he had been playing a lot of minutes and they were trying to get him a little bit of rest. Now, if you back out those 3 games and you just look at the other games that were sandwiched before and after it, this is a guy who's put up 44 fantasy the last 4 games that he's played his full allotment of minutes. Now, we expect this to be a game he plays his full allotment of minutes, especially without LeBron James. So not only is he going to play more minutes here, but he's going to see more shots and have a higher usage. So there's a ton of reasons why we think Kevin Love can outperform his $6,800 salary. Remember, the last time LeBron James was out, this is a guy who went out and had 52.5 fantasy points. If he can give us 52.5 fantasy, you'd be looking at an 8x return on a guy who's almost 7K and almost surely a high placing in a lot of years. So those are 4 of the guys who we're looking at here. Obviously we want to be able to put all the studs in there, but if you're using guys like Kevin Love and using guys like James Harden, you're going to need some of those cheaper options that we threw in there as well. George Hill is not a guy whose game logs are all that sexy, so I think he's going to be a low-owned option. But again, people have been doing so well against this Chicago team lately that, every point guard going up against them is giving you a floor of 5x with upside, 8, 9, 10x kind of value. So if you're going to get that kind of value out of guys going up against Chicago point guards, I think it's got to be a position that we keep targeting for the rest of the season here. So with George Hill pretty cheap at only $4,700, I really think he has a lot of upside at low ownership tonight to help you win a tournament. So that wraps it up for our DraftKings NBA plays for today, Tuesday, March 29th. Thank you guys for joining us here at rotocurve.com. And as always, stay classy, DFS.